Hello, hello, there you are. Sorry, I just surprised myself. I suddenly realised, oh, it's 3 o'clock. I need to click over to the other screen. I've just been looking at an online friend's progress in a campaign to get a really cute plushie made. I'm just going to put a link for it in here for you so you can see. It is so cute. And order one, go on. You've got less than 24 hours, I think it's 22 hours left to be able to actually order it. And then after that, the opportunity's gone. Yeah, and it's definitely going to go ahead because they more than met their 100% goal, because it's when they don't meet their 100% goal that they actually cancel, not the person, the organisation that's making it. And they're at, let's see, I'll pull up the right page. In terms of meeting their goal, they are at 1,500%, more than 1,500% of meeting the goal, the funding level. So that's, yeah, it's definitely going ahead. I will introduce you to, just a moment, I just have to get this where I can see it. Meet Quest Sprout. It doesn't look quite as weirdly green and yellow as that. That's just because the way that my colours are adjusted on my monitor. That's a little wooden sword, and he's a little tiny, well, in the comics, web comics, he's a little tiny character that goes around saying quest with his little wooden sword because he wants to go on a quest. And yes, I did say swords comic, and I'm going to give you the link. First of all, I'm going to give you the link for ordering your very own, and you have less than 1 day to do the order, your very own Quest Sprout. And I'm also going to give you Matthew's link for his Twitter account, because that will give you access to where his swords comics are. So here's his Twitter account. And yes, I know it's nothing to do with me reading. Well, it is kind of a type of reading. It's just not sort of reading that I do. Matthew Wills writes swords comic, and they are wonderful. They're hilarious. And the BBC has even said that Quest Sprout was what we needed, what the world needed. Wholesome. There you go. Go over there and order it, or open another tab in your browser and have a look at those, and make sure you do it before the end of today, because otherwise you're going to miss out. And that's it, they're gone then. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to having my very own Quest Sprout. I can now shut that window and get ready to read. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Jeff, and I normally read old-fashioned children's books. At the moment, I'm just ranting about an online friend's side project of actually getting some plushies made of a really cute character from one of their webcomics. And I'm just delighted that it's got this far through the process. And I'm looking forward to it. It's not until March or April or something like that they actually would do the making of them. But yeah, looking forward to it. And I will be reading in just a moment. I'm just trying to get some things sorted out on my other monitor, because otherwise it will distract me and I will need to find out what is going on that monitor. You know, that's the way life seems to go, whatever. And we're back to the correct view here. I think on my monitor, I keep an eye on what's happening with the way my stream is working. Like if it suddenly seizes up, I can see it out of the corner of my eye because it's on the other monitor here. And yes, that has been known to happen. And if I know that that's what's happening, I will pause in my reading, let the computer because it's my computer that's processing it, that allows you to be able to see what's going on when you're watching. And therefore, by having that all up there, I can see what's going on. And if I need to, I can just wait a minute until it all comes together and starts happening properly, which is what we want. Yeah, so I muffed up that intro. I'll give it to you again. Hi, I'm Jev. I live in NZ and I read old-fashioned children's stories. The stories that I grew up reading, and also my parents and my grandparents. Some of the physical books are actually ones that literally my parents, my grandparents, as well as me, grew up reading. Other ones are stories that we read, but I'm currently reading them on a first generation iPad mini. I don't like throwing away tech if I can keep it going, and the one thing that this piece of tech will still work for is reading books. I can't put any apps on it, I can't update anything, it's just way too old for all of that sort of stuff, but hey, it's great for reading books from. Anyway, so we shall get reading. What we're currently reading is, sorry, I'm just getting this set up on the more things on the other monitor. Yeah, I did actually get myself sorted out. I did get some things fixed up, but it's like random, strange, whatever. It doesn't matter how well prepared you are, there's always going to be something that you forgot about. One of which was I figured out a technical problem just before, so that was really good. I'm really happy with that, having got that sorted out. Whatever. Anyway, people don't come here for audiobook style reading. They come here for the laughs, point and laugh, Hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. Oh, and it's Friday, formal Friday. You forgot to tell me. Formal Friday, so it's time for the tiara. There you go. The tiara came about for some of us in New Zealand because Friday, when you're working in an office, some office places have casual Friday. And so because we were in lockdown last year and the year before, this is now, yeah, okay. One of our TV personalities, Barrie, she just encouraged people to have a little bit of fun with being stuck at home with lockdown, because a lot of people were working at home. And she said, rather than having casual Friday, because I mean, when you're in lockdown at home, every day is casual, regardless of whether it's Friday or not. And so she started doing formal Friday, and she would get dressed up in an evening dress, an evening outfit, sparkly if she could do it. And she's got this gorgeous tiara, and she would wear this tiara. And so she would do any of her social things for the day, like Zoom meetings and stuff like that, in her formal Friday outfit, one of her outfits. And so just as a way of joining in with it, it was like, okay, well, it's Friday, so therefore I'm going to wear my tiara. And so there were quite a few of us who would post pictures on Instagram and Twitter with hashtags formal Friday, just for the fun of it, because why not? So I'm going to find you. No, I'm not there. I don't need to do it on that window. I'm just going to get set up for today's story pictures, because why? Because I just have to move that now. Otherwise we won't actually get to see the pictures, the illustrations from the story that we've got. And if I look like I'm looking slightly sideways, it's because I'm trying to look at my overlay that's in front of me while I'm resizing something, but that doesn't matter. It's not relevant for you. So here we go. Before we get started, I would like to make a suggestion that you have something to drink. I've also got a coffee. That's good. Sorry about banging the microphone. Something to drink, something to snack on if you need it, because I usually read for an hour and a half. You're going to get hungry. And if you've got some snacks, that'll keep you going. And also, if you're not working or studying, then somewhere comfortable to sit, so you can just enjoy it. And it's a lot more like bedtime stories than audiobooks, because I muff things, I go off on sidetracks, I explain things that you don't get that in an audiobook. I mean, they might give you footnotes, but they don't tell you about what life experiences are to do with something in the story, because the authors had that experience or the readers had that experience, do they? It's not, I mean, they miss out. We get all the fun. So we get all sorts of random ass stuff. And also, I mean, I make mistakes. I read things wrong. I get accents. I'm terrible at accents. About the only accents we get is someone who is a little bit rough maybe, and may possibly be either a farmer or a pirate or someone from Cornwall, Devon or Somerset or Yorkshire, but I think probably my Yorkshire accent is actually my Cornish, Devon, Somerset version of an accent. But that doesn't matter because we're not doing this professionally, we're doing this for the fun of it. Old-fashioned children's stories are great because you actually get to, in your head, be somewhere else, a different time, a different place. Some of them are imaginary ones and some of them are real places. I've been to some of the places that we've actually read about. Even though the books we've read have been fictitious, I've actually been to some of the places that the story is set. And it's really neat actually being able to remember being somewhere like that. And if I've got those experiences, I like to share them with people because when I'm reading a story, because it helps the story itself, even though it's fiction, even though it's made up, to actually have a lot more sense of connectedness and realism. And in this day and age, when there's so much horrible stuff going on in the world, it's really good to just give our brains and our hearts and emotions, our minds, a break from all the horrible and have something that's entertaining. Or sometimes it's not always the most pleasant in a story, like Peter and Wendy is not the Disney version of the story. It is a little bit more harsh than that. But we know it's not happening to us and we know it's not happening to real people. And so it makes it, we can have some entertainment while we're listening to a story, knowing that it's going to resolve in the end. So here we go. We are reading Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. Most people know it as Peter Pan. That was one of its later titles. But I'm reading from a modern digital copy of the original book, which was published in, I think, 1911, and it was originally actually written as a stage play. And then the author rewrote it as this book. And so I'm reading chapter 10 of Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie, The Happy Home. One important result of the brush on the lagoon was that it made the redskins their friends, the brush with death, destruction, horrible things happening. And if you're not sure what that was, if you're listening on Twitch, the recording I've already done of the previous recording is still available, probably. In 2 weeks' time, it'll be up on YouTube. That's the other thing. Sorry, ADHD. My brain will go sideways sometimes and I'll be halfway through saying something and it's like, I know there's a word. What was it? It's red. It's got a play button. YouTube. That's the one. Yeah, I save my stories over there. And so you can actually listen to them as whole books because I put them into playlists. So I'll go over that again. One important result of the brush on the lagoon was that it made the redskins their friends. Peter had saved Tiger Lily from a dreadful fate, and now there was nothing she and her braves would not do for him. All night they sat above, keeping watch over the home under the ground and awaiting the big attack by the pirates, which obviously could not be much longer delayed. Even by day they hung about, smoking the pipe of peace and looking almost as if they wanted tidbits to eat. They called Peter the Great White Father, prostrating themselves before him. That means throwing themselves down face first on the ground. And he liked this tremendously, so that it was not really good for him. The Great White Father, he would say to them in a very lordly manner as they grovelled at his feet, is glad to see the Piccaninny warriors protecting his wigwam from the pirates. Yeah, we talked about this last time. Supposedly the Redskins are based on North American Indians. They're not really. Just accept that they're a fictionalized, a fictional people type, okay? Rather than getting offended by it, because otherwise just don't listen to the story if you're going to get offended by it, okay? Sorry, I'm not going to change the language of the story. I'm not going to change the characters in it. To suit modern sensibilities, we can learn from this. We can not do the same things ourselves in the way if we're writing books. We can write with a lot more sensitivity, but we can also learn how people used to put things that were or weren't actually acceptable in our day and age, but were definitely acceptable at the time. Okay, so I'm going to carry on reading. Enough of the real life rant. Oh, and here's my Quest Sprout pin. I was talking about Quest Sprout just when we started. And there he is. Isn't he sweet? He's so cute. So I've got a little enamel pin. I got him for Christmas. And he's a lot greener looking than that. It's just the way it looks in my camera. Right, the great white father, he would say to them in a very lordly manner as they grovelled at his feet, is glad to see the Piccaninny warriors protecting his wigwam from the pirates. Me Tiger Lily, that lovely creature would reply. Peter Pan save me. Me his very nice friend. Me not let pirates hurt him. She was far too pretty to cringe in this way, but Peter thought it was his due, and he would answer condescendingly, It is good. Peter Pan has spoken. Peter was lost when he was an infant, and he's never grown up. He's still got his baby teeth, which means he's 7 years old or younger, because most people lose their front baby teeth when they are 7. So he's probably 6 years old in his head and his heart. And so he's got all of that bluster and very self-centered thinking that is common at that age. Always when he said Peter Pan has spoken, it meant that they must now shut up, and they accepted it humbly in that spirit, but they were by no means so respectful to the other boys, whom they looked upon as just ordinary braves. They said how do to them, and things like that, and what annoyed the boys was that Peter seemed to think that this was all right. Secretly, Wendy sympathised with them a little, but she was far too loyal a housewife to listen to any complaints against father. Father knows best, she always said, whatever her private opinion must be. I'm just getting flashbacks to watching Tangled and the Mother Knows Best song. I wonder if they had that thought from having read this. Carrying on. Father knows best, she always said, whatever her private opinion must be. Her private opinion was that the Redskins should not call her a squaw. A squaw, I think, was a woman within the Redskins tribe, like a mother type figure. But from their usage of the word, she's English, and so therefore it's not what she wants to be called. We have now reached the evening that was to be known among them as the Night of Nights, because of its adventures and their upshot. The day, as if quietly gathering its forces, had been almost uneventful, and now the Redskins in their blankets were at their posts above, while below the children were having their evening meal, all except Peter, who had gone out to get the time. The way you got the time on the island was to find the crocodile and then stay near him till the clock struck. This is a bit odd. The clock that the crocodile has swallowed is a striking clock. It must be a pretty big crocodile for him to have swallowed a clock that is still ticking. Mind you, it's an imaginary land. I suppose that's not quite so unrealistic for them. So he's still ticking. The clock hasn't run down yet, and it strikes. All the striking clocks I know you have to wind every day, otherwise they don't work. But that's okay. That's the way the story goes. And I'm also going to, while I'm reading, I'm terrible at this, aren't I? I'm just having a quick look to see if there are any pictures I need to be ready to show you. I don't know if I showed you the picture of the Neverbird, which was in the reading just the other day. Was going to. There he is. This is from the other version of the book, the one that's more like the one I first read when I was growing up. So there's Peter Pan, and there's was it Smee? Somebody's hat with the Neverbird's eggs in it, and there's the bird up there. She gave up her nest so that Peter could get off the rock and not be drowned, because he's too young to have learnt to swim properly. Getting there, getting this ready for when I have to get the picture out for you. Terrible. Wouldn't listen to that lady again because she doesn't get herself organised. Never mind. The way you got the time on the island was to find the crocodile and then stay near him till the clock struck. This meal happened to be a make-believe tea, and they sat around the board, guzzling in their greed, and really, what with their chatter and recriminations, the noise, as Wendy said, was positively deafening. To be sure, she did not mind noise, but she simply would not have them grabbing things, and then excusing themselves by saying that Tootles had pushed their elbow. There was a fixed rule that they must never hit back at meals, but should refer the matter of dispute to Wendy by raising the right arm politely and saying, "I complain of so-and-so." So obviously Wendy's instigated some rules, but what usually happened was that they forgot to do this or did it too much. "Silence," cried Wendy for the 20th time. She had told them that they were not all to speak at once. "Is your calabash empty, Slightly darling?" "Not quite empty, Mummy," Slightly said after looking into an imaginary mug. "He hasn't even begun to drink his milk," Nibs interposed. This was telling, and Slightly seized his chance. "I complain of Nibs," he cried promptly. John, however, had held up his hand first. "Well, John?" "May I sit in Peter's chair as he's not here?" "Sit in Father's chair, John?" Wendy was scandalised. "Certainly not." "He's not really our father," John answered. "He didn't even know how a father does till I showed him." This was grumbling. "We complain of John," cried the twins. Tootles held up his hand. He was so much the humblest of them, indeed he was the only humble one, that Wendy was especially gentle with him. "I don't suppose," Tootles said diffidently, "that I could be father." "No, Tootles." Once Tootles began, which was not very often, he had a silly way of going on. "As I can't be father," he said heavily, "I don't suppose, Michael, you would let me be baby?" "No, I won't," Michael rapped out. He was already in the basket. So Wendy and John's youngest brother is the pretend baby of the tribe. "As I can't be baby," Tootles said, getting heavier and heavier, "do you think I could be a twin?" "No, indeed," replied the twins. "It's awfully difficult to be a twin." "As I can't be anything important," said Tootles, "would any of you like to see me do a trick?" "No," they all replied. Then at last he stopped. "I hadn't really any hope," he said. The hateful telling broke out again. "Slightly is coughing on the table." The twins began with mammy apples. "Curly is taking both tapper rolls and yams." Nibs is speaking with his mouth full. "I complain of the twins." "I complain of Curly." "I complain of Nibs." Oh dear, cried Wendy. "I'm sure I sometimes think that children are more trouble than they are worth." She told them to clear away and sat down to her work basket, a heavy load of stockings and every knee with a hole in it as usual. "Wendy," remonstrated Michael, "I'm too big for a cradle." "I must have somebody in a cradle," she said almost tartly, "and you are the littlest. A cradle is such a nice homely thing to have about a house." While she sewed, they played around her, such a group of happy faces and dancing limbs lit up by that romantic fire. It had become a very familiar scene, this, in the home under the ground, but we are looking on it for the last time. There you go. That's pretty blatant foreshadowing. It's not really foreshadowing at all. It's the storytellers actually told us, haven't they? Rearranging my desk so I can prop up my book so I don't have to look down so far. There you go, that's better. We are looking on it for the last time. There was a step above, and Wendy, you may be sure, was the first to recognise it. "Children, I hear your father's step. He likes you to meet him at the door." Above, the redskins crouched before Peter. "Watch well, braves, I have spoken." And then, as so often before, the gay children dragged him from his tree, as so often before, but never again. He had brought nuts for the boys as well as the correct time for Wendy. "Peter, you just spoil them, you know," said Wendy. "Ah, old lady," said Peter, hanging up his gun. "It was me told him mothers are called old lady," Michael whispered to Curly. "I complain of Michael," said Curly instantly. The first twin came to Peter. "Father, we want to dance." "Dance away, my little man," said Peter, who was in high good humour. "But we want you to dance." Peter was really the best dancer among them. Sorry. Thankfully, my keyboard hasn't gone and done anything weird. Peter was really the best dancer among them, but he pretended to be scandalised. Me, my old bones would rattle. So he's enjoying playing a grown-up. It's a game still, obviously, for him. My old bones would rattle. And Mummy too. What? Cried Wendy. The mother of such an armful dance? But on a Saturday night? Slightly insinuated. It was not really Saturday night, at least it may have been, for they had long ago lost count of days. But always, if they wanted to do anything special, they said this was Saturday night. And then they did it. Of course, it is Saturday night, Peter, Wendy said, relenting. People of our figure, Wendy. But it is only amongst our own progeny. True, true. So they were told they could dance, but they must put on their nighties first, nightshirts. Ah, old lady, Peter said aside to Wendy, warming himself by the fire and looking down at her as she sat, turning a heel. That's mending the heel of a stocking. There is nothing more pleasant of an evening for you and me when the day's toil is over than to rest by the fire with the little ones nearby. It is sweet, Peter, isn't it? Wendy said, frightfully gratified. Peter, I think Curly has your nose. Michael takes after you. She went to him and put her hand on his shoulder. Dear Peter, she said, with such a large family, of course. I have now passed my best, but you don't want to change me, do you? No, Wendy. Certainly he did not want to change, but he looked at her uncomfortably, blinking, you know, like one who is not sure whether he is awake or asleep. Peter, what is it? I was just thinking, he said, a little scared. It is only make-believe, isn't it, that I am their father? Oh, yes, said Wendy primly. You see, he continued apologetically, it would make me seem so old to be their real father. But they are ours, Peter, yours and mine. But not really, Wendy, he asked anxiously. Peter's very insecure, if you hadn't figured that one out by now. Not if you don't wish it, she replied, and she distinctly heard his sigh of relief. Peter, she asked, trying to speak firmly, what are your exact feelings for me? Those of a devoted son, Wendy. I thought so, she said, and went and sat by herself at the extreme end of the room. You are so queer, he said, frankly puzzled. And Tiger Lily is just the same. There is something she wants to be to me, but she says it is not my mother. No, indeed it is not, Wendy replied with frightful emphasis. Now we know why she was prejudiced against the Redskins. I think the two women are jealous of each other, two girls. Then what is it? It isn't for a lady to tell. Oh, very well, Peter said with a little nettled. Perhaps Tinker Bell will tell me. Oh, yes, Tinker Bell will tell you, Wendy retorted scornfully. She is an abandoned little creature. Here, Tink, who was in her boudoir, eavesdropping, squeaked out something impudent. She says she glories in being abandoned, Peter interpreted. He had a sudden idea. Perhaps Tink wants to be my mother. You silly ass, cried Tinker Bell in a passion. She had said it so often that Wendy needed no translation. I almost agree with her, Wendy snapped. Fancy Wendy snapping. But she had been much tired, and she little knew what was to happen before the night was out. If she had known, she would not have snapped. None of them knew. Perhaps it was best not to know. Their ignorance gave them one more glad hour, and as it was to be their last hour on the island, let us rejoice that there were 60 glad minutes left in it. They sang and danced in their nightgowns, such a deliciously creepy song it was, in which they pretended to be frightened at their own shadows, little witting that so soon shadows would close in upon them, from whom they would shrink in real fear. So uproariously gay was the dance, and how they buffeted each other on the bed and out of it. It was a pillow fight rather than a dance, and when it was finished, the pillows insisted on one bout more, like the partners who know that they may never meet again. The stories they told before it was time for Wendy's good-night story. Even Slightly tried to tell a story that night, but the beginning was so fearfully dull that it appalled even himself, and he said gloomily, Yes, it is a dull beginning. I say, let us pretend that it is the end. And then at last they all got into bed for Wendy's story, the story they loved best, the story Peter hated. Usually When she began to tell this story, he left the room or put his hands over his ears, and possibly if he had done either of those things this time, they might all still be on the island. But tonight he remained on his stool, and we shall see what happened. And that's the end of the chapter, so it's time for squeaky noises from my water bottle opening. It's time for me to have a drink. Stay hydrated, keep the brain working, and the rest of the body. You too. And you've got a moment or two to go off and get yourself a drink and a snack if you didn't have them ready before. Okay? So quick, run off. Go and get a snack. Sorry. Itchy nose. The usual. Yes, I did talk to the cat, but I didn't get really close to him. I'm not allergic, just for those who are worried, I'm not allergic to the cat, but he has very, very fine fur. And so because of that, you can get a tiny wisp of fur that sits on your skin and you don't even realize it's there because it's so fine. It's not like a piece of hair. And it will sit there, and as something moves, you'll get this very, very slight tickling on your skin, and it's like, what is that? Why am I itchy? And then you realize it's just this tiny bit of cat fur. I should find you a picture of him, actually. Let's see if I can find one. While you're off getting your drink, or while some of you are off getting your drink, I shall find you a picture of this cat, because I do have one, I'm sure. Nearly there, nearly there. Getting to the keyboard so I can copy something. So come over here and paste something. How are you going with getting your snacks and your drinks? Have you got them? Are you all ready? And we shall go for one of these pictures. This one will do. Oh, got to resize. Because I haven't got my pictures set up the right size for showing here. Not the cat picture anyway. There he is. That's the cat. And yes, the colour is really out of balance. Yeah, and he is saying, seriously? Talking? It just seemed appropriate for the look on his face at the time. So yeah, we think he's part Maine Coon. He's actually a rescue cat. We got him from the SPCA. My daughter did when she was living down in Auckland. And because of that, because he was rescued, they have no idea where he originally came from, do they? And so he has no pedigree. We don't know if he actually is. And I don't know if there's any way that you can actually tell what breed an animal is if you don't actually know where they originally came from. Anyway, he's really cute. We like him. He's a bit of a character, very much a strong character. He knows exactly what he likes, and he is not going to compromise on that. I think we're probably all a bit like that, aren't we? Just trying to find the right picture here, so that when we get to that part of the book, because the book I'm reading is using the illustrations that I'm using on the screen, I can actually see when I need to show you the next picture. Right, you are back, you're in your comfortable seat, you have your drink of water or whatever else it is that you're drinking to keep you hydrated, and maybe a nice drink. I've got coffee. Have you got a G&T? Or have you got some Fanta? Or L&P? That's a very Kiwi drink. It's a soft drink, or soda, or pop, or whatever you want to call it for where you live. Lemon and Pyroar. And originally it was a particular type of mineral water with lemon with it. And It's nothing particularly wildly exciting, but it's different to lemonade and it's quite nice. And it's really good in other things too. So, we shall carry on. Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. James, I think. And we are reading chapter 11, Wendy's story. So something's going to happen to Wendy, I think, if they're giving us her story of what happened next. Listen then, said Wendy, settling down. Oh, the story that she's telling, that's right, sorry. They keep on telling us that everything's going to change and I'm expecting it's going to be this, but no, we're going to get the story first. Listen then, said Wendy, settling down to her story with Michael at her feet and 7 boys in the bed. There was once a gentleman. I'd rather he had been a lady, Curly said. I wish he had been a white rat, said Nibs. Quiet, their mother admonished them. There was a lady also, and... Oh, Mummy, cried the first twin, you mean that there is a lady also, don't you? She's not dead, is she? Oh, no. I'm awfully glad she isn't dead, said Tootles. Are you glad, John? Of course I am. Are you glad, Nibs? Rather. Are you glad, twins? We are glad. Oh, dear, sighed Wendy. This story's going to take a long time. Little less noise there, Peter called out, determined that she should have fair play, however beastly a story it might be in his opinion. The gentleman's name, Wendy continued, was Mr. Darling, and her name was Mrs. Darling. I knew them, John said, to annoy the others. I think I knew them, said Michael, rather doubtfully, because he's quite a lot younger, and so therefore his memories are not as strong. They were married, you know, explained Wendy, and what do you think they had? White rats? Cried Nibs, inspired. No, it's awfully puzzling, said Tootles, who knew the story by heart. Quiet, Tootles. They had 3 descendants. What is descendants? Well, you are one, twin. Do you hear that, John? I'm a descendant. Descendants are only children, said John. Oh dear, sighed Wendy. Now these 3 children had a faithful nurse called Nana, but Mr. Darling was angry with her and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away. Oh, sorry, itchy nose again. It's an awfully good story, said Nibs. They flew away, Wendy continued, to the Neverland, where the lost children are. I just thought they did, Curly broke in excitedly. I don't know how it is, but I just thought they did. Oh, Wendy, cried Tootles, was one of the lost children called Tootles? Yes, he was. I'm in a story. Hurrah, I'm in a story, Nibs. Hush, now I want you to consider the feelings of the unhappy parents with all their children flown away. Oh, they all moaned, though they were not really considering the feelings of the unhappy parents one jot. Think of the empty beds. Oh, it's awfully sad, the first twin said cheerfully. I don't see how it can have a happy ending, said the second twin. Do you, Nibs? I'm frightfully anxious. If you knew how great is a mother's love, Wendy told them triumphantly, you would have no fear. She had now come to the part that Peter hated. I do like a mother's love, said Tootles, hitting Nibs with a pillow. Do you like a mother's love, Nibs? I do just, said Nibs, hitting back. You see, Wendy said complacently, our heroine knew that the mother would always leave the window open for her children to fly back by. So they stayed away for years and had a lovely time. Did they ever go back? Let us now, said Wendy, bracing herself for her finest effort, take a peep into the future. And they all gave themselves the twist that makes peeps into the future easier. Years have rolled by, and who is this elegant lady of uncertain age alighting at London Station? Oh, Wendy, who is she? Cried Nibs, every bit as excited as if he didn't know. Can it be? Yes? No? It is the fair Wendy. Oh, they all said. And who are the 2 noble, portly figures accompanying her, now grown to man's estate? Can they be John and Michael? They are. Oh, said the boys. See, dear brothers, said Wendy, pointing upwards. There is the window still standing open. Ah, now we are rewarded for our sublime faith in a mother's love. So up they flew to their mummy and daddy, and pen cannot describe the happy scene over which we will draw a veil. That's not her story, but in the book story. That was the story, and they were as pleased with it as the fair narrator herself. Everything just as it should be, you see. Off we skip like the most heartless things in the world, which is what children are, but so attractive. And we have an entirely selfish time, and then when we have need of special attention, we nobly return for it, confident that we shall be embraced instead of smacked. So great indeed was their faith in a mother's love that they felt they could afford to be callous for a bit longer. But there was one there who knew better, and when Wendy finished, he uttered a hollow groan. "What is it, Peter?" she cried, running to him, thinking he was ill. She felt him solicitously, lower down than his chest, so she's checking his stomach, because often children have stomach aches, and that makes them groan. "Where is it, Peter?" "It isn't that kind of pain," Peter said darkly. "Then what kind is it?" "Wendy, you are wrong about mothers." They all gathered round him in a fright. So alarming was his agitation, and with a fine candour he told them what he had hitherto concealed. "Long ago," he said, "I thought like you that my mother would always keep the window open for me, so I stayed away for moons and moons and moons, and then flew back. But the window was barred, for mother had forgotten all about me, and there was another little boy sleeping in my bed." I'm not sure that this was true, but Peter thought it was true, and it scared them. "Are you sure mothers are like that?" "Yes." So this was the truth about mothers. The toads! Still, it is best to be careful, and no one knows so quickly as a child when he should give in. "Wendy, let us go home," cried Michael and John together. "Yes," she said, clutching them. "Not tonight?" asked the lost boys, bewildered. They knew in what they called their hearts that one can get on quite well without a mother, and that it is only the mothers who think you can't. "At once," Wendy replied resolutely, for the horrible thought had come to her, perhaps mother is in half mourning by this time. This dread made her forgetful of what must be Peter's feelings, and she said to him rather sharply, "Peter, will you make the necessary arrangements?" "If you wish it," he replied, as coolly as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. And here we have a picture. This picture, I think. Yes, there it is. And thankfully I've been able to get it so that the picture has, I'll scroll it around a little bit for you. These are the redskins. These are the redskins up the top, guarding the tunnels down the trees. And this is the little house under the ground where the boys are sitting up in bed, listening to the story. There's Michael in the basket, and there's Wendy telling the story. She's sitting on a stool, and there's Peter in the corner, sitting on his stool and not feeling at all happy about the story. And the title on the picture is Wendy's Story. Sorry, yes, I'm very short-sighted, and the picture has the words very small at the bottom of it. So that's why if you see me holding something right up close to my face to read it to you, that's why. It's because it's a little bit hard to see it well. There. We'll carry on. Not so much as a sorry to lose you between them. This is Peter and Wendy. Remember? I'm just getting ready for the next picture. I'll read the very last bit of that. If you wish it, he replied, as coolly as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. Not so much as a sorry to lose you between them. If she did not mind the parting, he was going to show her, was Peter, that neither did he. But of course he cared very much, and he was so full of wrath against grown-ups, who, as usual, were spoiling everything, that as soon as he got inside his tree, he breathed intentionally quick, short breaths at a rate of about 5 to a second. He did this because there is a saying in the Neverland that every time you breathe, a grown-up dies. And Peter was killing them off vindictively as fast as possible. Then, having given the necessary instructions to the redskins, he returned to the home, where an unworthy scene had been enacted in his absence. Panic-stricken at the thought of losing Wendy, the lost boys had advanced upon her threateningly. "It will be worse than before she came," they cried. Sorry, just getting my chair back to where it won't roll away. "We shan't let her go. Let's keep her prisoner. Aye, chain her up." In her extremity, an instinct told her to which of them to turn. "Tootles," she cried, "I appeal to you." Was it not strange? She appealed to Tootles. Was it not strange? She appealed to Tootles. Quite the silliest one. Grandly, however, did Tootles respond. For that one moment he dropped his silliness and spoke with dignity. "I am just Tootles," he said, "and nobody minds me. But the first who does not behave to Wendy like an English gentleman, I will blood him severely." He drew his hanger, and for that instant his sun was at noon. He was at the peak. The others held back uneasily. Then Peter returned, and they saw at once that they would get no support from him. He would keep no girl in the Neverland against her will. "Wendy," he said, striding up and down, "I have asked the redskins to guide you through the wood as flying tires you so." "Thank you, Peter." "Then," he continued in the short, sharp voice of one accustomed to be obeyed, "Tinker Bell will take you across the sea. Wake her, Nibs." Nibs had to knock twice before he got an answer, though Tink had really been sitting up in bed listening for some time. "Who are you? How dare you? Go away!" she cried. "You are to get up, Tink," Nibs called, "and take Wendy on a journey." Of course, Tink had been delighted to hear that Wendy was going, but she was jolly well determined not to be her courier, and she said so in still more offensive language. Then she pretended to be asleep again. "She says she won't," Nibs exclaimed, aghast at such insubordination, whereupon Peter went sternly towards the young lady's chamber. "Tink," he rapped out, "if you don't get up and dress at once, I will open the curtains, and then we shall all see you, in your negligee." This made her leap to the floor. "Who said I wasn't getting up?" she cried. In the meantime, the boys were gazing very forlornly at Wendy, now equipped with John and Michael for the journey. By this time they were dejected, not merely because they were about to lose her, but also because they felt that she was going off to something nice to which they had not been invited. Novelty was beckoning to them as usual. Crediting them with a nobler feeling, Wendy melted. "Dear ones," she said, "if you will all come with me, I feel almost sure I can get my father and mother to adopt you." The invitation was meant specifically for Peter, but each of the boys was thinking exclusively of himself, and at once they jumped with joy. "But won't they think us rather a handful?" Nibs asked in the middle of his jump. "Oh, no," said Wendy, rapidly thinking it out. "It will only mean having a few beds in the drawing-room. They can be hidden behind screens on First Thursdays." Whatever First Thursdays are. "Peter, can we go?" they all cried imploringly. They took it for granted that if they went, he would go also, but really they scarcely cared. Thus children are ever ready, when novelty knocks, to desert their dearest ones. "All right," Peter replied with a bitter smile, and immediately they rushed to get their things. "And now, Peter," Wendy said, thinking she had put everything right, "I am going to give you your medicine before you go." She loved to give them medicine, and undoubtedly gave them too much. Of course, it was only water. But it was out of a calabash, and she always shook the calabash and counted the drops, which gave it a certain medicinal quality. On this occasion, however, she did not give Peter his draught, for just as she had prepared it, she saw a look on his face that made her heart sink. "Get your things, Peter," she cried, shaking. "No," he answered, pretending indifference. "I am not going with you, Wendy." "Yes, Peter." "No." To show that her departure would leave him unmoved, he skipped up and down the room, playing gaily on his heartless pipes. She had to run about after him, though it was rather undignified. "To find your mother," she coaxed. Now, if Peter had ever quite had a mother, he no longer missed her. He could do very well without her. He had thought them out and remembered only their bad points. "No, no," he told Wendy decisively. "Perhaps she would say I was old, and I just want to always be a little boy and to have fun. But Peter, no." And so the others had to be told, "Peter isn't coming." "Peter not coming?" They gazed blankly at him, their sticks over their backs, and on each stick a bundle. Their first thought was that if Peter was not going, he had probably changed his mind about letting them go. But he was far too proud for that. "If you find your mothers," he said darkly, "I hope you will like them." The awful cynicism of this made an uncomfortable impression, and most of them began to look rather doubtful. After all, their faces said, were they not noodles to want to go? "Now then," cried Peter, "no fuss, no blubbering. Goodbye, Wendy." And he held out his hand cheerily, as if they must really go now, for he had something important to do. She had to take his hand, as there was no indication that he would prefer a thimble. "You will remember about changing your flannels, Peter," she said, lingering over him. She was always so particular about their flannels. That's underwear, I think. "Yes, and you will take your medicine." "Yes." That seemed to be everything, and an awkward pause followed. Peter, however, was not the kind that breaks down before people. "Are you ready, Tinker Bell?" he called out. "Aye, aye." "Then lead the way." Tink darted up the nearest tree, but no one followed her, for it was at this moment that the pirates made their dreadful attack upon the redskins. Above, where all had been so still, the air was rent with shrieks and the clash of steel. Below, there was silence. Mouths opened and remained opened. Wendy fell on her knees, but her arms were extended toward Peter. All arms were extended to him, as if suddenly blown in his direction. They were beseeching him mutely not to desert them. As for Peter, he seized his sword, the same he thought he had slain Barbecue with, and the lust for battle was in his eye. Because he's heard there's a battle going on, hasn't he? And that's the end of that chapter, and I am not reading the next one till I've had a drink. And the pause between chapters here won't be as long, probably. So how are you doing? I hope your seat is still comfortable. If not, wriggle around, find a better way to sit there, or turn over, lie on the floor. That's okay. Like the cat. He lies on the floor. He likes lying on the floor. That's the way he does it. Yeah. Right, here we go. Actually, not quite here we go. I'm just going to check to see how many chapters we've got to go. We're up to chapter 12, the next one we're going to read. Chapter 12. There are 17 chapters, so we've still got a little bit to go. Right, chapter 12, Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 12, The Children Are Carried Off. The pirate attack had been a complete surprise, a sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it improperly, for to surprise redskins fairly is beyond the wit of the white man. By all the unwritten laws of savage warfare, it is always the redskin who attacks, and with the wiliness of his race, he does it just before the dawn, at which time he knows the courage of the whites to be at its lowest ebb. The white men have in the meantime made a rude stockade of the summit of yonder undulating ground, at the foot of which a stream runs, for it is destruction to be too far from the water. There they await the onslaught, the inexperienced ones clutching their revolvers and treading on twigs, but the old hands sleeping tranquilly till just before the dawn. Through the long black night the savage scouts wriggle snake-like among the grass without stirring a blade. The brushwood closes behind them as silently as sand into which a mole has dived. Not a sound is to be heard, save when they give vent to a wonderful imitation of the lonely call of the coyote. The cry is answered by other braves, and some of them do it even better than the coyotes, who are not very good at it. So the chill hours wear on, and the long suspense is horribly trying to the pale face who has to live through it for the first time. But to the trained hand, those ghastly calls and still ghastlier silences are but an intimation of how the night is marching. That this was the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it, he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. In other words, in the Neverland, there is a certain way that battles take place, certain types of attacks, and he is not going by those rules. My coffee, it's good. The pickaninnies, on their part, trusted implicitly to his honour, and their whole action of the night stands out in marked contrast to his. They left nothing undone that was consistent with the reputation of their tribe, with that alertness of the senses, which is at once the marvel and despair of civilised peoples, civilised in Victorian era's opinion of itself. They knew that the pirates were on the island from the moment one of them trod on a dry stick, and in an incredibly short space of time, the coyote cries began. Every foot of ground between the spot where Hook had landed his forces and the home under the trees was stealthily examined by braves, wearing their moccasins with the heels in front. That's to leave backwards footprints, I would guess. They found only one hillock, with a stream at its base, so that Hook had no choice. Here he must establish himself and wait for just before dawn. Everything being thus mapped out with almost diabolical cunning, the main body of the redskins folded their blankets around them and, in the phlegmatic manner that is to them the pearl of manhood, squatted above the children's home, awaiting the cold moment when they should deal pale death. Here, dreaming, though wide awake, of the exquisite tortures to which they were to put him at break of day, those confiding savages were found by the treacherous Hook. From the accounts afterwards supplied by such of the scouts as escaped the carnage, he does not seem even to have paused at the rising ground, though it is certain that in that grey light he must have seen it. In other words, what's with this no building a stockade? No thought of waiting to be attacked appears from first to last to have visited his subtle mind. He would not even hold off till the night was nearly spent. On he pounded with no policy but to fall to. What could the bewildered scouts do, masters as they were of every warlike artifice, save this one, but trot helplessly after him, exposing themselves fatally to view? This is the ones who were watching at the hill, and now having to follow him, and they have been seen. The while they gave pathetic utterance to the coyote cry. Around the brave tiger lily were a dozen of her stoutest warriors, and they suddenly saw the perfidious pirates bearing down upon them. Fell from their eyes then the film through which they had looked at victory. No more would they torture at the stake. For them, the happy hunting grounds now. The happy hunting grounds was their view of heaven. You go to the happy hunting grounds when you die. They knew it, but as their father's sons, they acquitted themselves. Even then they had time to gather in a phalanx that would have been hard to break had they risen quickly. But this they were forbidden to do by the traditions of their race. It is written that the noble savage must never express surprise in the presence of the white. Thus terrible at the sudden appearance of the pirates must have been to them, they remained stationary for a moment, not a muscle moving, as if the foe had come by invitation. Then indeed, the tradition gallantly upheld, they seized their weapons, and the air was torn with the war cry. But it was now too late. It is no part of ours to describe what was a massacre rather than a fight. Thus perished many of the flower of the Piccaninny tribe. Not all unavenged did they die, for with Lean Wolf fell Elf Mason to disturb the Spanish Main no more. In other words, some of the pirates were killed too. And among the others who bit the dust were Geo Scoury, that's George Scoury, Chas Turley, that's Charles Turley, and the Alsatian Fogarty. Turley fell to the tomahawk of the terrible Panther, who ultimately cut a way through the pirates with Tiger Lily and a small remnant of the tribe. To what extent Hook is to blame for his tactics on this occasion is for the historian to decide. Had he waited for the rising ground till the proper hour, he and his men would probably have been butchered, and in judging him it is only fair to take this into account. What he should perhaps have done was to acquaint his opponents that he proposed to follow a new method. On the other hand, this, as destroying the element of surprise, would have made his strategy of no avail, so that the whole question is beset with difficulties. One cannot at least withhold a reluctant admiration for the wit that had conceived so bold a scheme, and the fell genius with which it was carried out. What were his own feelings about himself at that triumphant moment? Fain would his dogs have known, as breathing heavily and wiping their cutlasses, they gathered at a discreet distance from his hook, and squinted through their ferret eyes at this extraordinary man. Elation would have been in his heart, but his face did not reflect it. Even as ever a dark and solitary enigma, he stood aloof from his followers, in spirit as in substance. The night's work was not yet over, for it was not the redskins he had come to destroy. They were but the bees to be smoked, so that he should get at the honey. It was Pan that he wanted. Pan and Wendy and their band, but chiefly Pan. Peter was such a small boy that one tends to wonder at the man's hatred of him. True, he had flung Hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this and the increased insecurity of life to which it led, owing to the crocodile's pertinacity, hardly account for a vindictiveness so relentless and malignant. Lots of big words in this story. The truth is that there was a something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage. It was not his engaging appearance. There is no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was and have got to tell. It was Peter's cockiness. This had got on Hook's nerves. It made his iron claw twitch, and at night it disturbed him like an insect. While Peter lived, the tortured man felt that he was a lion in a cage into which a sparrow had come. The question now was how to get down the trees, or how to get his dogs down. That's his pirates. He ran his greedy eyes over them, searching for the thinnest ones. They wriggled uncomfortably, for they knew he would not scruple to ram them down with poles. In the meantime, what of the boys? We have seen them at the first clang of weapons, turned as it were into stone figures, open-mouthed, all appealing with outstretched arms to Peter, and we return to them as their mouths close and their arms fall to their sides. The pandemonium above has ceased almost as suddenly as it arose, passed like a fierce gust of wind, but they know that in the passing it has determined their fate. Which side has won? The pirates, listening avidly at the mouths of the trees, heard the question put by every boy, and alas, they also heard Peter's answer. If the redskins have won, he said, they will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now, Smee had found the tom-tom and was at that moment sitting on it. You will never hear the tom-tom again, he muttered, but inaudibly, of course, for strict silence had been enjoined. To his amazement, Hook signed to him to beat the tom-tom, and slowly there came to Smee an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the order. Never, probably, had this simple man admired Hook so much. Twice Smee beat upon the instrument, and then stopped to listen gleefully. The tom-tom, the miscreants heard Peter cry. An Indian victory! The doomed children answered with a cheer that was music to the black hearts above, and almost immediately they repeated their goodbyes to Peter. This puzzled the pirates. But all their other feelings were swallowed by a base delight that the enemy was about to come up the trees. They smirked at each other and rubbed their hands. Rapidly and silently, Hook gave his orders, one man to each tree and the others to arrange themselves in a line 2 yards apart. And that's the end of that chapter. We'll have the next one in a minute. Sorry, I'll just get my chair so it's sitting slightly differently. And then we shall carry on. I shall probably have a stopper or something that I can put behind my chair so it doesn't try and roll around. Right. Nearly. Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. This is chapter 13. Do you believe in fairies? And I'm going to change the angle slightly on my camera. Nope, not quite. That's better. Do you believe in fairies? The more quickly this horror is disposed of, the better. The first to emerge from his tree was Curly. He rose out of it into the arms of Secco, looks Italian, Cecco, who flung him to Smee, who flung him to Starkey, who flung him to Bill Jukes, who flung him to Noodler, and so he was tossed from one to another till he fell at the feet of the black pirate. So that was that line of pirates that were 2 feet apart, or whatever it was, 2 yards apart. All the boys were plucked from their trees in this ruthless manner, and several of them were in the air at a time, like bales of goods flung from hand to hand. Oh, we've got a picture here. Flung like balls. Yes, there it is. So you've got someone coming out of a tree, and then you've got a pirate waiting to capture the one that's coming out of the tree, and here's some of the pirates tossing the boys between them to get them sent up to where Captain Hook is. There's even one up there being tossed from one to another. We shall carry on. A different treatment was accorded to Wendy. Accorded to Wendy, who came last. With ironical politeness, Hook raised his hat to her and, offering her his arm, escorted her to the spot where the others were being gagged. He did it with such an air, he was so frightfully distinguished, that she was too fascinated to cry out. She was only a little girl. Perhaps it is telltale to divulge that for a moment Hook entranced her, and we tell on her only because her slip led to strange results. Had she haughtily unhanded him, and we should have loved to write it of her, she would have been hurled through the air like the others, and then Hook would probably not have been present at the tying of the children, and had he not been at the tying, he would not have discovered Slightly's secret. And without the secret, he could not presently have made this foul attempt on Peter's life. They were tied to prevent their flying away, doubled up with their knees close to their ears, and for the trussing of them the black pirate had cut a rope into 9 equal parts. All went well until Slightly's turn came, when he was found to be like those irritating parcels that use up all the string in going round and round, and leaving no tags with which to tie the knot. The pirates kicked him in their rage, just as you kick the parcel, though in fairness you should kick the string. It's the string that's the problem. And strange to say, it was Hook who told them to belay their violence. His lip was curled with malicious triumph, while his dogs were merely sweating because that every time they tried to pack the unhappy lad tight in one part, he bulged out in another. Hook's master mind had gone far beneath Slightly's surface, probing not for effects but for causes, and his exultation showed that he had found them. Slightly, white to the gills, knew that Hook had surprised his secret, which was this, that no boy so blown out could use a tree wherein an average man need stick. Poor Slightly, most wretched of all the children now, for he was in a panic about Peter, bitterly regretted what he had done. Madly addicted to the drinking of water when he was hot, he had swelled in consequence to his present girth, and instead of reducing himself to fit his tree, he had, unknown to the others, whittled his tree to make it fit him. Sufficient of this Hook guessed to persuade him that Peter at last lay at his mercy, but no word of the dark design that now formed in the subterranean caverns of his mind crossed his lips. He merely signed that the captives were to be conveyed to the ship and that he would be alone. How to convey them? Hunched up in their ropes, they might indeed be rolled down the hill like barrels, but most of the way lay through a morass. That's like a swamp. Again, Hook's genius surmounted difficulties. He indicated that the little house must be used as a conveyance. The children were flung into it. 4 stout pirates raised it on their shoulders, the others fell in behind, and singing the hateful pirate chorus, the strange procession set off through the wood. I don't know whether any of the children were crying. If so, the singing drowned the sound. But as the little house disappeared in the forest, a brave, though tiny, jet of smoke issued from its chimney, as if defying Hook. I didn't realise that the house actually had a floor to it. Did you? Oh, goodness. That was not what I was expecting. I'm just getting ready for the next picture. And that the fire is still going. This is the Wendy house, remember? We talked about the Wendy house and the fact that children's playhouses for a long time were actually called Wendy houses because of this house in the story. It was smoke from the chimney, as if defying Hook. Hook saw it, and it did Peter a bad service. It dried up any trickle of pity for him that may have remained in the pirate's infuriated breast. The first thing he did on finding himself alone in the fast-falling night was to tiptoe to Slightly's tree and make sure that it provided him with a passage. Then for long he remained brooding, his hat of ill omen on the sward, that's the grass, so that a gentle breeze which had arisen might play refreshingly through his hair. Dark as were his thoughts, his blue eyes were as soft as the periwinkle. Intently he listened for any sound from the netherworld, that's from below. But it was all silent below as above. The house under the ground seemed to be but one more empty tenement in the void. Was that boy asleep, or did he stand waiting at the foot of Slightly's tree with his dagger in his hand? There was no way of knowing save by going down. Hook let his cloak slip softly to the ground, then biting his lips till a lewd blood stood upon them, he stepped into the tree. He was a brave man, but for a moment he had to stop there, wipe his brow, which was dripping like a candle, then silently he let himself go into the unknown. Because he's never been down inside the tree before, and he's not done this sort of travelling from one place to another either. He arrived unmolested at the foot of the shaft and stood still again, biting at his breath, which had almost left him. As his eyes became accustomed to the dim light, various objects in the home under the trees took shape, but the only one on which his greedy gaze rested, long sought for and found at last, was the great bed. On the bed lay Peter, fast asleep. Unaware of the tragedy being enacted above, Peter had continued for a little time after the children left to play gaily on his pipes, no doubt rather a forlorn attempt to prove to himself that he did not care. Then he decided not to take his medicine so as to grieve Wendy, not that she's going to know. Then he lay down on the bed outside the coverlet to vex her still more, for she had always tucked them inside. Because you never know that you may not grow chilly at the turn of the night. Then he nearly cried, but it struck him how indignant she would be if he laughed instead. So he laughed a haughty laugh and fell asleep in the middle of it. He thinks he's proving to Wendy that he doesn't care. He's actually trying to prove it to himself, I think. Sometimes, though not often, he had dreams, and they were more painful than the dreams of other boys. For hours he could not be separated from these dreams, though he wailed piteously in them. They had to do, I think, with the riddle of his existence. At such times, it had been Wendy's custom to take him out of bed and sit with him on her lap, soothing him in dear ways of her own invention, and when he grew calmer, to put him back to bed before he quite woke up. So it's probably stroking his head and just gently, quietly talking to him in his ear saying, it's all right, the way parents will often soothe a restless child. Put him to bed before he quite woke up, so that he should not know of the indignity to which she had subjected him. But on this occasion he had fallen at once into a dreamless sleep. One arm dropped over the edge of the bed, one leg was arched, and the unfinished part of his laugh was stranded on his mouth, which was open, showing the little pearls, that's his little baby teeth. Thus defenceless, Hook found him. He stood silent at the foot of the tree, looking across the chamber at his enemy. Did no feeling of compassion disturb his sombre breast? The man was not wholly evil. He loved flowers, I have been told, and sweet music. He himself was no mean performer on the harpsichord, and let it be frankly admitted, the idyllic nature of the scene stirred him profoundly. Mastered by his better self, he would have returned reluctantly up the tree, but for one thing. What stayed him was Peter's impertinent appearance as he slept, the open mouth, the drooping arm, the arched knee. So Peter's lying on his back with his knee poking up in the air. The arched knee, they were such a personification of cockiness as, taken together, will never again, one may hope, be presented to the eyes so sensitive to their offensiveness. They steeled Hook's heart. If his rage had broken him into 100 pieces, every one of them would have disregarded the incident and leapt at the sleeper. Though a light from one lamp shone dimly on the bed, Hook stood in darkness himself, and at the first stealthy step forward he discovered an obstacle, the door of Slightly's tree. It did not entirely fill the aperture, and he had been looking over it. Feeling for the catch, he found to his fury that it was low down beyond his reach. To his disordered brain it seemed then that the irritating quality in Peter's face and figure visibly increased, and he rattled the door and flung himself against it. Was his enemy to escape him after all? But what was that? The red in his eye had caught sight of Peter's medicine standing on a ledge within easy reach. He fathomed what it was straight away, and immediately he knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful drug, blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession. These he had boiled down into a yellow liquid quite unknown to science, which was probably the most virulent poison in existence. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup. His hand shook, but it was in exultation rather than in shame. As he did it, he avoided glancing at the sleeper, but did not lest pity should unnerve him, merely to avoid spilling. He didn't avoid looking at Peter in case he was going to take pity on him. He did it to avoid spilling. Then one long gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning, wormed his way up with difficulty, up the tree. As he emerged at the top, he looked the very spirit of evil breaking from its hole. Donning his hat at a most rakish angle, he wound his cloak round him, holding one end in front as if to conceal his person from the night, of which it was the blackest part. And muttering strangely to himself, he stole away through the trees. Peter slept on. The light guttered and went out, leaving the tenement in darkness. But still he slept. It must have been not less than 10 o'clock by the crocodile, when he suddenly sat up in his bed, wakened by he knew not what. It was a soft, cautious tapping on the door of his tree. Soft and cautious, but in that stillness it was sinister. Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it. Then he spoke. "Who is that?" For long there was no answer. Then again the knock. "Who are you?" No answer. He was thrilled, and he loved being thrilled. In 2 strides he reached his door. Unlike Slightly's door, it filled the aperture, so that he could not see beyond it, nor could the one knocking see him. "I won't open unless you speak," Peter cried. Then at last the visitor spoke in a lovely bell-like voice. "Let me in, Peter." It was Tink, and quickly he unbarred to her. She flew in excitedly, her face flushed and her dress stained with mud. "What is it?" "Oh, you could never guess," she cried, and offered him 3 guesses. "Out with it," he shouted, and in one ungrammatical sentence, as long as the ribbons conjurers pull from their mouths, she told of the capture of Wendy and the boys. Peter's heart bobbed up and down as he listened. Wendy bound, and on the pirate ship, she who loved everything to be just so. "I'll rescue her," he cried, leaping at his weapons. As he leapt, he thought of something he could do to please her. He could take his medicine. His hand closed on the fatal draught. "No!" shrieked Tinker Bell, who had heard Hook muttering about his deed as he sped through the forest. "Why not?" "It's poisoned." "Poisoned? Who could have poisoned it?" "Hook." "Don't be silly. How could Hook have got down here?" Alas, Tinker Bell could not explain this, for even she did not know the dark secret of Sprightly's tree. Nevertheless, Hook's words had left no room for doubt. The cup was poisoned. "Besides," said Peter, quite believing himself, "I never fall asleep." He raised the cup. No time for words now, time for deeds, and with one of her lightning movements, Tink got between his lips and the draught and drained it to the dregs. "Why, Tink, how dare you drink my medicine?" But she did not answer. Already she was reeling in the air. "What is the matter with you?" cried Peter, suddenly afraid. "It was poisoned, Peter," she told him softly, "and now I am going to be dead." "Oh, Tink, did you drink it to save me?" "Yes." "But why, Tink?" Her wings could scarcely carry her now, but in reply she alighted on his shoulder and gave his chin a loving bite. She whispered in his ear, "You silly ass," then tottering to her chamber, lay down on the bed. His head almost filled the fourth wall of her little room as he knelt near her in distress. Every moment her light was growing fainter, and he knew that if it went out she would be no more. She liked his tears so much that she put out her beautiful finger and let them run over it. Her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said. Then he made it out. She was saying that she thought she could get well again if children believed in fairies. Peter flung out his arms. There were no children there, and it was night time, but he addressed all who might be dreaming of the Neverland, and who were therefore nearer to him than you think. Boys and girls in their nighties, and naked papooses in their baskets hung from trees. "Do you believe?" he cried. Tink sat up in bed almost briskly to listen to her fate. She fancied she heard answers in the affirmative, and then again she wasn't sure. "What do you think?" she asked Peter. "If you believe," he shouted to them, "clap your hands. Don't let Tink die." Many clapped. Some didn't. A few little beasts hissed. The clapping stopped suddenly, as if countless mothers had rushed to their nurseries to see what on earth was happening. But already Tink was saved. First her voice grew strong, then she popped out of bed, then she was flashing through the room more merry and impudent than ever. She never thought of thanking those who believed, but she would have liked to get at the ones who had hissed. Very Tink. And now to rescue Wendy. The moon was riding in a cloudy heaven when Peter rose from his tree, begirt with weapons and wearing little else, to set out upon his perilous quest. It was not such a night as he would have chosen. He had hoped to fly, keeping not far from the ground, so that nothing unwanted should escape his eyes, but in that fitful light, to have flown low would have meant trailing his shadow through the trees, thus disturbing the birds and acquainting a watchful foe that he was astir. He regretted now that he had given the birds of the islands such strange names that they are very wild and difficult to approach. There was no other course but to press forward in redskin fashion, at which happily he was an adept. But in what direction? For he could not be sure that the children had been taken to the ship. A slight fall of snow had obliterated all footmarks. Didn't know it snowed. And a deathly silence pervaded the island, for as if for a space nature stood still in horror of the recent carnage. He had taught the children something of the forest law that he had himself learned from Tiger Lily and Tinker Bell, and knew that in their dire hour they were not likely to forget it. Slightly, if he had an opportunity, would blaze the trees, for instance. That means making a mark in the bark of the tree so it is a sign to anyone trying to track you. Curly would drop seeds, and Wendy would leave her handkerchief at some important place. But morning was needed to search for such guidance, and he could not wait. The upper world had called him, but would give no help. The crocodile passed him, but not another living thing, not a sound, not a movement, and yet he knew well that sudden death might be at the next tree or stalking him from behind. He swore this terrible oath, hook or me this time. He crawled forward like a snake. And again, erect, he darted across a space on which the moonlight played, one finger on his lip and his dagger at the ready. He was frightfully happy. He likes a good battle. Goodness me, it's 4:30 nearly, and that's the end of that chapter. Do I read the next one? Oh, I'm going to see where it gets to. I think we'll read the next one. We can't leave you there with not knowing if he finds them. Although I'm pretty sure you would have figured out that he must find them. He can't just leave them. Okay, I better have a drink of water. I'm getting a little bit dry. I hope I'm not distracting you too much if you're working. Or maybe I do hope that you will be distracted. Not if you're going to get in trouble for not doing your work. I don't want that happening. Anyway. Sorry, itchy nose this time. Let's see. Where did I get up to on the pictures? I'm not going to show you. I'm going to show me where I got up to on the pictures. There. I'm looking at the page number. Oh, yes. Okay. Got it. Quick look. Actually, I'm going to show you this picture now. I'm not sure where it comes in the text. That's one thing about this book is it doesn't actually show the pictures in line with where it's actually happening, unlike the other ones. There you go. There's Peter sneaking through the undergrowth. And the caption is, hook or me this time. There you go. Hook or me this time. That's Peter vowing it to himself. But he's also taking great delight in the challenge. He likes a lot of that sort of fun, doesn't he? Right, we shall carry on. Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. This is chapter 14, The Pirate Ship. One green light, squinting over Kidd's Creek, which is near the mouth of the Pirate River, marked where the brig, the Jolly Roger, lay low in the water, a rakish-looking craft foul to the hull, every beam in her detestable, like ground strewn with mangled feathers. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I've had a fair bit to do with boats over the years. You don't leave a boat in this state, not if you want to be able to use it. Foul, when it says foul to the hull, traditionally in boat terms, that actually means that it's got a lot of sea plant life and creature life growing on it, and it leaves it in very bad condition. And if you're trying to move the boat in a hurry, it doesn't. Anyway, we'll carry on. But yeah, it kind of speaks of the personality of the man in charge. She was the cannibal of the seas and scarce needed that watchful eye, for she floated immune in the horror of her name. She was wrapped in the blanket of night, through which no sound from her could have reached the shore. There was little sound, and none agreeable save the whir of the ship's sewing machine, at which Smee sat, ever industrious and obliging, the essence of the commonplace, pathetic Smee. I know not why he was so infinitely pathetic, unless it was because he was so pathetically unaware of it, or even strong men had to turn hastily from looking at him, and more than once on summer evenings he had touched the fount of Hook's tears and made it flow. In other words, I think Hook had cried because Smee is just so pathetic. Of this, as of almost everything else, Smee was quite unconscious. Having a quick look at this other book as well, just in case there's some pictures I need to find for you. We had the Neverbird one. I found that. This other one is even more out of order with the pictures. I have no idea why. It's just so strange. The sequence that they have on the pictures in some of these books. The ones in, who's the other lady we've been reading? The one who wrote The Treasure Seekers and 5 Children in It. The pictures are in the right place. They're even in the right chapters. It's like wonderful. Yay, this makes sense. Oh, goodness. I think there's one. Yes, it's not very clear in this one. This is where the Redskins were guarding the house. The children are down below. Sorry, turning it the wrong way. The children were down below, and Wendy is telling them stories. There's the children in the bed, and then there's one of the Redskins guarding the tunnel, the hole in the tree. But that's just the way that one is. Anyway, we're long past there. Oh, goodness me. Right. Smee, pathetic, of which Smee was quite unconscious that this is how people felt. A few of the pirates leaned over the bulwarks, drinking in the miasma of the night. Bulwarks are they're kind of like a handrail around the edge of the boat to stop people falling over. Others sprawled by barrels over games of dice and cards, and the exhausted 4 who had carried the little house lay prone on the deck, where even in their sleep they rolled skillfully to this side or that out of Hook's reach, lest he should claw them mechanically in passing. Just randomly claw them because it's the thing he does. That's what they mean by mechanically. Hook trod the deck in thought. Oh, man unfathomable. That means unable to measure the depth of, but it uses a nautical term. A fathom is a depth in the water of 6 feet, which is nearly 2 meters, but not quite. Unfathomable means unable to measure the depth of, because of the word fathom in there. There you go. It was his hour of triumph. Peter had been removed forever from his path, and all the other boys were on the brig about to walk the plank, because he's thinking that Peter has drunk the poison. It was his grimmest deed since the days when he had brought barbecue to heel, and knowing as we do how vain a tabernacle is man, could we be surprised that he now paced the deck unsteadily, bellied out by the winds of his success? But there wasn't, in other words, he's rather proud of himself, and so he's probably not quite so well balanced. But there was no elation in his gait which kept pace with the action of his sombre mind. Hook was profoundly dejected. He was often thus when communing with himself on board ship in the quietude of the night. It was because he was so terribly alone. This inscrutable man never felt more alone than when surrounded by his dogs. They were socially so inferior to him. Hook was not his true name. To reveal who he really was would, even at this date, set the country in a blaze, but as those who read between the lines must have already guessed, he had been at a famous public school, and its traditions still clung to him like garments, with which indeed they are largely concerned. Thus it was offensive to him even now to board a ship in the same dress in which he grappled her, and he still adhered in his walk to the school's distinguished slouch. But above all, he retained the passion for good form. Good form, however much he may have degenerated, he still knew that this is all that really matters. From far within him he heard a creaking as of rusty portals, and through them came a stern tap, 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 like hammering in the night when one cannot sleep. "Have you been good form today?" was their eternal question. "Fame, fame, that glittering bauble, it is mine," he cried. "Is it quite good form to be distinguished at anything?" The tap, tap from his school replied. "I am the only man whom Barbecue feared," he urged, and Flint himself feared Barbecue. "Barbecue? Flint? What house?" came the cutting retort, because at the sort of school that he went to, you came from different houses, different groups within the school. And so if they weren't from any of them, then they weren't really much of anything. The most disquieting reflection of all, was it not bad form to think about good form? His vitals were tortured by this problem. It was a claw within him sharper than the iron one, and as it tore him, the perspiration dripped down his tallow countenance and streaked his doublet. Oftentimes he drew his sleeve across his face, but there was no damming that trickle. Ah, envy not Hook. There came to him a presentiment of his early dissolution. It was as if Peter's terrible oath had boarded the ship. Hook felt a gloomy desire to make his dying speech, lest presently there should be no time for it. Better for Hook, he cried, if he had had less ambition. It was in his darkest hours only that he referred to himself in third person. No little children love me. Strange that he should think of this, which had never troubled him before. Perhaps the sewing machine brought it to his mind. For long he muttered to himself, staring at Smee, who was hemming placidly, under the conviction that all children feared him. Feared Smee. There was not a child on board the brig that night who did not already love him. He had said horrid things to them, and hit them with the palm of his hand because he could not hit with his fist, but they had only clung to him the more. Michael had tried on his spectacles to tell poor Smee that they thought him lovable. Hook itched to do it, but it seemed too brutal. Instead, he revolved this mystery in his mind. Why do they find Smee lovable? He pursued the problem like the sleuth hound that he was. If Smee was lovable, what was it that made him so? A terrible answer suddenly presented itself. Good form? Had the boatswain good form without knowing it, which is the best form of all? He remembered that you have to prove you don't know you have it before you are eligible for POP. I'm not sure what POP is. It's probably something to do with private schools, which we would call them private schools, but over there it's called a public school back in that day and age. Not many of them in New Zealand. This is a word I don't know, POP. You can look that one up and put it in the chat or over in our Discord server. And that way we can all know. With a cry of rage, he raised his iron hand over Smee's head, but he did not tear. What arrested him was this reflection. To claw a man because he is good form, what would that be? Bad form. The unhappy Hook was as impotent as he was damp, and he fell forward like a cut flower. His dogs, thinking him out of the way for a time, discipline instantly relaxed, and they broke into a bacchanalian dance which brought him to his feet at once, all traces of human weakness gone, as if a bucket of water had passed over him. "Quiet, you scugs," he cried, "or I'll cast anchor in you." And at once the din was hushed. "Are all the children chained so they cannot fly away?" "Aye, aye." "Then hoist them up." The wretched prisoners were dragged from the hold, all except Wendy, and ranged in line in front of him. For a time he seemed unconscious of their presence. He lolled at his ease, humming, not unmelodiously, snatches of a rude song, and fingered a pack of cards. Ever and anon the light from his cigar gave a touch of colour to his face. "Now then, bullies," he said briskly, "6 of you walk the plank tonight, but I have room for 2 cabin boys. Which of you is it to be?" "Don't irritate him unnecessarily," had been Wendy's instructions in the hold, so Tootles stepped forward politely. Tootles hated the idea of signing under such a man, but an instinct told him that it would be prudent to lay the responsibility on an absent person, and though a somewhat silly boy, he knew that mothers alone are always willing to be the buffer. All children know this about mothers and despise them for it, but make constant use of it, using their mothers as an excuse for what they are required to do or not do. So Tootles explained prudently, "You see, sir, I don't think my mother would like me to be a pirate. Would your mother like you to be a pirate, Slightly?" He winked at Slightly, who said mournfully, "I don't think so," as if he wished things had been otherwise. "Would your mother like you to be a pirate, Twin?" "I don't think so," said the first twin, as clever as the others. "Nibs would—" "Stow this gab," roared Hook, and the spokesmen were dragged back. "You boy," he said, addressing John, "you look as if you had a little pluck in you. Doesn't never want to be a pirate, me hearty?" Now John had sometimes experienced this hankering at maths prep. That's class time. And he was struck by Hook's picking him out. "I once thought of calling myself Red-Handed Jack," he said diffidently. "And a good name too. We'll call you that here, bully, if you join." "What do you think, Michael?" asked John. "What would you call me if I joined?" said Michael. "Blackbeard Joe." Michael was naturally impressed. "What do you think, John?" He wanted John to decide, and John wanted him to decide. "Shall we still be respectful subjects of the king?" John inquired. Through Hook's teeth came the answer, "You would have to swear down with the king." Perhaps John had not behaved very well so far, but he shone out now. "Then I refuse," he cried, banging the barrel in front of Hook. "And I refuse," cried Michael. "Rule Britannia!" squeaked Curly. The infuriated pirates buffeted them in the mouth, and Hook roared out, "That seals your doom. Bring up their mother. Get the plank ready." They were only boys, and they went white as they saw Jukes and Secco preparing the fatal plank, but they tried to look brave when Wendy was brought up. No words of mine can tell you how Wendy despised those pirates. To the boys, there was at least some glamour in the pirate calling, but all that she saw was that the ship had not been scrubbed for years. There was not a porthole on the grimy glass of which you might not have written with your finger, "Dirty Pig," and she had already written it on several. But as the boys gathered round her, she had no thought, of course, save for them. "So, my beauty," said the Hook, as if he spoke in syrup, "you are to see your children walk the plank." Sorry, itchy. Fine gentleman though he was, the intensity of his communings had soiled his ruff, and suddenly he knew that she was gazing at it. With a hasty gesture he tried to hide it, but he was too late. Are they to die?" asked Wendy, with a look of such frightful contempt that he nearly fainted. "They are," he snarled. "Silence all," he called gloatingly, "for a mother's last words to her children." At this moment, Wendy was grand. "These are my last words, dear boys," she said firmly. "I feel that I have a message to you from your real mothers, and it is this: we hope our sons will die like English gentlemen." Even the pirates were awed, and Tootles cried out hysterically, "I am going to do what my mother hopes. What are you going to do, Nibs?" "What my mother hopes. What are you to do, Twin?" "What my mother hopes. John, what are—" But Hook had found his voice again. "Tie her up!" he shouted. It was Smee who tied her to the mast. "See here, honey," he whispered, "I'll save you if you promise to be my mother." But not even for Smee would she make such a promise. I would almost rather have no children at all, she said disdainfully. It is sad to know that not a boy was looking at her as Smee tied her to the mast. The eyes of all were on the plank, that last little walk they were about to take. They were no longer able to hope that they would walk it manfully, for the capacity to think had gone from them. They could stare and shiver only. Hook smiled on them with his teeth closed and took a step towards Wendy. His intention was to turn her face so that she should see the boys walking the plank one by one, but he never reached her. He never heard the cry of anguish he hoped to wring from her. That's like when you're wringing something to get the water out of it, not ring, ring, ring like with a phone. He heard something else instead. It was the terrible tick, tick of the crocodile. They all heard it, pirates, boys, Wendy, and immediately every head was blown in one direction, not to the water whence the sound proceeded, but towards Hook. All knew that what was about to happen concerned him alone, and that from being actors they were suddenly become spectators. Very frightful was it to see the change that came over him. It was as if he had been clipped at every joint. He fell in a little heap. The sound came steadily nearer, and in advance of it came this ghastly thought: the crocodile is about to board the ship. Even the iron claw hung inactive, as if knowing that it was no intrinsic part of what the attacking force wanted. Left so fearfully alone, any other man would have lain with his eyes shut where he fell, but the gigantic brain of Hook was still working, and under its guidance he crawled on his knees along the deck as far from the sound as he could go. The pirates respectfully cleared a passage for him, and it was only when he brought up against the bulwarks that he spoke. "Hide me!" he cried hoarsely. They gathered round him, all eyes averted from the thing that was coming aboard. They had no thought of fighting it. It was fate. Only when Hook was hidden from them did curiosity loosen the limbs of the boys so that they could rush to the ship's side to see the crocodile climbing it. Then they got the strangest surprise on this night of nights, for it was no crocodile that was coming to their aid. It was Peter. He signed to them not to give vent to any cry of admiration that might rouse suspicion. Then he went on ticking. And that's the end of the chapter and the end of today's story. And you can come back on Monday, New Zealand time, if you want to hear it live, and listen to the rest of the story. Goodness me, we won't be finishing it next time. I think we've got at least 2 more readings. Do you remember all this happening? It's not exactly the same as it is in the Disney versions of the story. I know that much. But that's often the way it is with Disney stories. They tell them a little differently to what they were originally written, like quite a little differently. Anyway, so what am I going to tell you now? I'm going to tell you to follow me if you're on Twitch. That way Twitch will notify you when I am live. I'm also going to tell you that if you're watching this on YouTube, if you subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell, YouTube will tell you when I have put up a new story. So if you're new here, the idea is that I read live on Twitch. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you might want to actually be involved with when I'm telling a story live instead of where you're watching a recording. There's a link for it in my YouTube channel. You can come to my Twitch channel and watch me reading live. Both of them are free. It doesn't cost you anything to listen to my stories. You can join, you can subscribe, you can sign in, whatever it is, the phrasing, to both of those services, both Twitch TV and YouTube, for free. And then you can actually listen to and watch any of the stories that I do. The recordings that I make here on Twitch, the stories that I read, disappear after 2 weeks, and so I put them over on YouTube after that time. And when they're over on YouTube, I put them into playlists. And so if you are wanting to catch up on a story that you might have missed out on a session of, as long as it's 2 weeks after I've actually done the reading, you will actually find that story in its playlist over on YouTube. And if you're in the mood to listen to a whole book uninterrupted, apart from me nattering away, then you can actually go over to YouTube, find the playlist that you want, and then you can start it and just have me talking in your ear for hours. The longest playlist I have is the Millie Molly Mandy stories, because they're actually a compilation of all the stories about Millie Molly Mandy that Joyce Lancaster Brisley wrote, all put into one big long playlist, rather than separating them out into the separate books, because each of the readings that I do for Millie Molly Mandy, the way the stories are written, each story is a complete story. And it's just one of those lovely little things because of the particular type of storytelling that is. The rest of the books are, almost all of them, are ones where you have one overarching story with little bits happening in them rather than a collection of short stories, except for The Sun's Babies, which I was reading because it's a New Zealand author who most people have never heard of. And there are a couple of books that she's written that I read when I was growing up, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Yes, they're about fairies, but hey, whatever. But that particular one, The Sun's Babies, is a collection of short stories that she wrote. She wrote it as one book, but each of them is a short story. And they're slightly odd. Just the way she told stories was slightly odd. But that's okay, you might enjoy it. There's all sorts of stories over there. Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to give you the link for our Discord server, which is not very active, by the way. And that's where, if you're wanting to get into conversation with anyone else about stories, you can, it's like old-fashioned forums and bulletin boards. You can join our Discord server. That's another one that's free. And here's, for those of you who are on Twitch, here's my YouTube channel. And if you're watching me on YouTube, you won't see any of that, because you are seeing just this little box here on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, you're seeing it with an overlay that goes a lot further out. It has the title of the book written on it, has a picture of one of the covers of the book, and it has a chat panel alongside. A little bit like when you're watching someone live on YouTube, where there's a chat running. But I remove all of that when I put a story over onto YouTube, so that you just have the story rather than all the distraction of everything else. But if you're on YouTube and you want those links, Discord is one of the links that I have on my profile on YouTube. It's the same as I have Twitch on my profile on YouTube. So please join us in one of those places. I don't care where, but find it, do it. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, it'd be really nice if you give the stories a like. And you're welcome to comment on them too. That's why they're not listed as being in the for children section, because if something is listed as a for children, for kids section of YouTube, then you can't comment on them. I don't even know if you can like them or not. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All of that, way too much information. And we'll see you next time. Happy reading. Happy whatever it is that you're meant to be doing.